all right when I arrived. My mother even looked at Mary the last time I said, how do you stand up?
All right. Well, we will go ahead and get started. I know that we have got people on Facebook waiting to hear, and you all are here as well. I know excited for what Andrea's got for us. But thank you again for taking your time to be with us this morning. Thank you for those of you that are tuning in on Facebook to take time to be here with us this morning as well. I was really excited when I had started praying about who God wanted for Awaken. And Andrea and I have known each other and gotten to know each other as she's been here at the church. And I got to be honest, last Sunday when Pastor Dean said he was bringing them up to the platform and how they were such a good part of the church, I'm not going to lie, I got real anxious and I got real nervous because I thought, here we go. Another good one's leaving, and what are we going to do? And I was up there just praying, like, God, please don't let them go. Because, I mean, she's a great friend. They're so good to us here at the church. They do so much. And I'm like, here we go. And another one's going. And he just kept dragging it on, I felt like, for forever. And I was like, just spit it out that they're leaving so we can get out of here. So then he said they were going to be voted on, and I was like, yes! So it's funny, how God works it out, because she's speaking for us today. And, being a previous pastor's wife that she is, I thought she would be itching for this opportunity. And she's like, it's kind of out of my comfort zone, but I'm going to do it. And it's been a while, so I'm just really excited to hear what God's got for us today through her, and I hope that you are too. So let's give Andrea a warm welcome and hear what she's got for us today.
So I guess if I had to sing something, Glenda Williams, after that, it would be, she was thinking, another one bites the dust. And I'm thinking, hey, it's good to be back home again. How fast? And I'm not used to being on a camera at all. So just bear with me if you would. All right, Jessica, tell me again. I just do the arrow to the right.
Yes.
Remember, from 2 weeks ago, it stayed in my head. That's a miracle in itself. I hope you brought Bibles, because we're going to use them today. We're going to start off in the book of 2 Kings. So I'll let you start heading there. We've had an awful lot of discussion in the past several months about first responders, obviously, with all the COVID and with all the rioting and all the issues in our country going on. Are we working, Jessica?
Yeah.
Everything's good, okay. Hello, all of you out there in TV land. That's probably the only time I'll remember to look at you. That's the part I meant that was out of my comfort zone. I love being with people, but I'm not the electronics person. So anyway, we've heard an awful lot on the news and been upholding in prayer and in love and in support our first responders. And that word has made me think an awful lot about how we respond. So what I want to do today is use some examples out of the Bible about some people, not just women, but some people and how they responded to things that happened in their lives. So if you don't mind, I kind of feel like the half-calf coffee that's racing in my heart and my fingers that are shaking like a leaf need to pray first so that I keep things in order, and then we'll jump right in, all right? Thank you, Father, for being so good to us. Oh, how I thank you. We got to come back to church for this meeting today. It just feels like it's been forever, and I thank you that the virus situation is beginning to subside, it seems like. We thank you for that miracle in itself. We thank you for your hand of protection on our church family here. Thank you for the privilege of being able to be here, and I pray, Lord, that you would use the lesson that, honestly, you've been preaching at me for over a year now in my heart. I pray that you'd help me to be able to relay it in such a way that it would help the ladies here. Bless all that goes on, please. In your name I pray. Amen. All right, so we're going to talk about it's not first responders, just responders in the Bible. There's several ways, as you see up here, several ways that we can learn from the Bible. I remember a couple meetings ago, Pastor Justin's wife, beautiful little Miss Lizzie, she taught about Bible study, actually studying the Bible. So there's lots of different ways that we can learn from the things that the Lord has for us. First of all, of course, is preaching. When we show up for church on Sunday, we should come, and this is the way I kind of like to analyze it, listening intently to God's man, open God's book, and share what God himself has impressed on the heart of that man. Which means it's kind of like you, if you're a grandma, sitting down with your grandchild and reading The Three Bears. It's not really your story, but you're trying to get it to that child in such a way that their eyes light up and you know that they get it and they're right with you in the story. That's what a pastor's doing on Sunday morning. God's done something in his heart all week, and maybe for months. I don't know how many times I've heard my husband say, I had this one ready, and it's just not the time yet. And then months later he would say, oh, I had this one ready months ago, and the Lord's been working on it in my heart. And that's the time that it's presented. So we can learn that way, and we should, every Sunday. If you see me at the altar every Sunday, I promise it's not because I was at the beer joint the night before and I didn't get my heart right over that. I heard a pastor say years ago, when the invitation's given, if God dealt with my heart, I want to go talk to him about what he dealt with me about. If God didn't deal with my heart, I'm worried and I want to go ask him why. And that has stuck with me. And man, when the invitation starts, it's like, I need to get there because he spoke to me. Because if he hadn't, I'd really need to get there and get there fast. So we can learn by preaching. We can learn by precepts, Bible precepts. Oh goodness, the book of Leviticus, just where God was telling the Levites what they were supposed to do, and the priests, and then the book of Deuteronomy. I love the book of Deuteronomy because it's teaching how you're supposed to get along with people. If your ox does this to that guy, this is what you ought to do about it. It's literally in there. So I love the book of Deuteronomy. Those are precepts that God teaches us through his word, how we should handle things. We can learn by example. As we're listening to the preaching or as we're reading the Bible, we can learn by example of what happened in somebody's life and what did they do and what was the result of it. I learned a lot by my older sister's example. I learned a lot of what not to do by watching her get in trouble for what she did. So I've been so thankful that I was the second in line and not the first in line, because she taught me an awful lot. We can learn topically. We can study verse by verse by verse. We can find verses that focus on a topic and follow that all the way through. I know people that do just a word search, like the word peace. You got a lot of turmoil in your heart? Go to a concordance. If you don't know how to use an old-fashioned book concordance, open up Google and just search the word, how many times is peace used in the Bible? And read every one of those verses, and God can teach you on a topic. We can go verse by verse, literally like Pastor Dean does a lot of times on Wednesday nights. He'll take just a segment and go through it and talk about the history and talk about the word usage and all that good stuff. So there's lots and lots of ways that we can learn. I've never done this before, so this is exciting. You have no idea how long Jessica worked to make sure that this would happen. So thank you, and I'm glad it's working. Today we're going to learn by example. I already mentioned I learned a lot from my older sister. Thank the Lord for her. And we're very close now because of all the stuff she taught me. So someone, as we already know, somebody's always watching us. We are going to be an example to somebody, regardless of whether we're sitting in a pew. The fact that we sit in a pew one week and we're not there the next week is an example. The fact that people know exactly where to find us every time they come into church, that's an example. If we're in the choir, they know exactly where to find us. I talk about where people sit based on my view from the choir. I don't know how you lay out the auditorium, but to me it's over there because I'm up there looking back and they're over there. And to you it's probably just the opposite. And Jessica's way up there and I couldn't hit her with a rock if I had to. So everybody around us teaches us something. And we teach everybody around us something by example. No man is an island. I love that line. No man is an island. We're not out there just floating all by ourselves. Some days we wish we were. In fact, lots of days we probably wish we were. But there's always somebody that's got an eye on you. I live on a terrible hill. I have a terrible driveway. I have nice neighbors, and I have one guy that walks the neighborhood all the time. And I can't tell you what planet he lives on. His feet are on Earth, but that's all I can tell you. But if he walks by, and all I happen to do is reach down and pull a weed, as I'm heading in the house, he'll say, "You're doing a good job there keeping your house in order." And it makes me chuckle every time, and then I pray that he gets safely over that hill and doesn't get hit because he's staggering up the middle of the road. But he notices every time I go outside to do something in my little dinky flower bed. That's an example. We keep the yard mowed. Our neighbors notice that. That's an example. Anyway, that's how we're going to learn today. We're going to have 3 test subjects, if you want to call them that. All right, like I said, they're not all going to be women. So you have a paper there in front of you, and it's divided out with some space to write things about these 3 different people. All right, so that's going to be your little place to take your notes. Our 3 test subjects today are going to be, first of all, the Shunammite woman from 2 Kings. the Shunammite woman, and then King Asa, and then Queen Esther. Everybody loves the story of Queen Esther. All right, so I want to read you two definitions, first of all. The word respond, according to Mr. Webster, the first definition is to answer or reply. Second definition is to react. The third definition is to have a favorable reaction. That's what Mr. Webster says a response is, to have a favorable reaction. Then I thought, well, what's the difference? He used react to define respond. So what does react mean? So I looked up react, and the first one it says to act in return or reciprocally. Like you slapped me, sister, I'm slapping you back. All right, that's a reaction. And I say that because the second one said to act in a reverse way, or to go back to a former condition or stage. Like you took me back to my temper, and now I'm going to slap you. Okay, that's what a reaction is. To respond to a stimulus is number 3, or then in chemistry, which I never took and never planned to act with another substance and producing a chemical reaction. All right, so those are all definitions of reacting. As I'm working through the stories today of each character, I want you to make notes there about some of the responses that you see that these people had to life's circumstances. So that's what I want this lesson to be, a reminder to us that we're all in life. And we're all going to face some of the same things that these 3 people, you're thinking, King Asa. Not a king here, buddy. Okay, but there's things that King Asa did and some of his responses that we have to decide how we're going to, if we're going to react the same way or not, or respond the same way. I love that little button. I'm so glad you showed me that's how that works. All righty. First of all, we're going to talk about the Shunammite woman. In 2 Kings, chapter number 4, there's a lot of verses here about this lady. So I'm not going to read them all, but I'm probably going to read them in chunks, all right? And as we read through, you'll understand the reason for the pictures. Little disclaimer, have you ever tried to search for the picture for lean-to? Most of the time you get a tree and 3 pieces of wood and something stuck at this end. The Bible tells us that this Shunammite lady wanted to build an addition onto their house for the man of God. So I'm thinking, how am I going to find, to me that was like a lean-to, because I know they didn't have a big castle. So I'm looking for a picture, and I thought, well, that at least has something added to the original structure. So that was the closest thing I could find to the prophet's house. So there you go. All right, chapter 4, we're going to read verses 8 through 10. And it fell on a day that Elisha passed to Shunem, where was a great woman. Oh, if the Lord would say that about me, I would be so happy. And she constrained him to eat bread. And so it was that as oft as he passed by, he turned in thither to eat bread. And she said unto her husband, so this was her idea, Behold now, I perceive that this is an holy man of God, which passeth by us continually. Let us make a little chamber, I pray thee, on the wall. Now, don't you picture either a closet or a lean-to when you read that? A little chamber on the wall, all right? So that's bigger than a little chamber on the wall, but oh well. And let us set for him there a bed and a table and a stool and a candlestick. And it shall be when he cometh to us that he shall turn in thither. So first of all, the Shunammite woman chose to take care of God's man. This was her decision. It doesn't say her husband approached her. She thought of it. She chose to take care of God's man. And then at verses 11 through 14, and it fell on a day that he came thither, and he turned into the chamber and lay there. And he said to Gehazi, his servant, Call this Shunammite. And when he had called her, she stood before him, and he said unto him, Say now unto her, Behold, thou hast been careful for us with all this care. What is to be done for thee? Wouldest thou be spoken for to the king? You want me to put in a good word for you to the king? Or to the captain of the host? You want me to have them make sure that the army protects your house and my little lean-to? And she answered, I dwell among mine own people. The second thing I see about this lady is she was content. The Bible says she was a great woman, and it doesn't really go into any detail what made her great. It doesn't say she was great with child, like that word's used somewhere else. It doesn't say she had great wealth. It just says she was a great woman. But she was content, which is kind of a hard thing to do sometimes. Then verses 15 through 17. And he said, Call her. This is Elisha saying to Gehazi, Call this lady. And when he had called her, she stood in the door. And he said, About this season, according to the time of life, thou shalt embrace a son. Now she is going to get great with child. And she said, Nay, my lord, thou man of God, do not lie unto thine handmaid. Instantly when I read that, my thought was, she's waited a long time for a baby and it never happened. And now somebody tells her she's going to have a baby. It's like, don't even try that. Don't even bring that up at this point in life. And the woman conceived, just like the man of God said, and bare a son at that season that Elisha had said unto her, according to the time of life. Can you just imagine? I cannot imagine. When I had my last child and finally got through the diaper stage and didn't have to carry a diaper bag, I am an independent Baptist background. I have no Pentecostal background in me at all, but I danced a jig through the house. And I threw that diaper bag away that day. I had carried a diaper bag for nigh unto 6 years. And I had what I called my diaper bag Bible, thin, small version, so it didn't take up more space or cause more weight. This lady had waited patiently for the opportunity to carry a diaper bag. And it had never come until now. Now she's got this opportunity. But then, notice verses 21 through 23. I'm sorry, I got to back up. I missed a section. Verse 20. Even farther. Verse 18. It amazes me how, we read through a chapter of the Bible, and it's like, okay, so I read 35 verses. It was a whole lifetime. In 35 verses. Between verse 17 and verse 18, she had that baby and he's grown up. I mean, it happens fast, but not normally that fast. Verse 18, and when the child was grown, it fell on a day when he went out to his father to the reapers. So he was out helping his dad in the field. And he said to his father, my head. He had a terrible headache. Brain aneurysm? Brain tumor? Who knows? He said, my head. And he said, the dad said to a lad, carry him to his mother. And when he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her knees till noon and then died. Talk about a heartbreak after all those years of waiting. God's man says you're going to have a baby, and she does, and he grows up, and then he dies with his head in her lap. I cannot imagine. And this, I can't picture this next part either. And she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God. This woman was here alone in the house with this adult son. How did she lug him to the man of God's bed? I have no idea, unless it was adrenaline because of the situation. And shut the door upon him and went out. And it sounds like it's a terrible end of the story. But then the rest of this just blows my mind. Verse 22 through 26. And she called unto her husband and said, send me, I pray thee, one of the young men and one of the asses, that I may run to the man of God and come again. And he said, wherefore wilt thou go to him today? It's neither new moon nor the Sabbath. And look at what she said. And she said, it shall be well. Oh my goodness. Her son just died. Her adult son just died in her lap. And she hauled him up and laid him on the man of God's bed and goes to get a horse or a donkey to go find the man of God and doesn't even tell her husband what's going on. There's no record that she told him what happened. She just said, I need some transportation. I need to go see the man of God. And he said, what's up? She said, don't worry, it's all going to be okay. Speechless. That's unusual for me. But I just cannot comprehend. She didn't stop there, though. I want you to notice, first of all, that she said, it shall be well. She couldn't, this is such a life's lesson. She couldn't see the end yet, but she knew God had it in control. 2 years ago, Labor Day weekend, 2 years ago, the Sunday before Labor Day, we stood in the auditorium for our first service in this church. And Brother Sidney got up and started off with the service with, my tribute, to God be the glory, great things he hath done. And I just sobbed. We just left everything that we'd known for the last 18 years and moved to the town, just the two of us, just moved into our house that week. Half of it was in order and half of it was in boxes. And we're singing my tribute to God be the glory. And all I could think was, Lord, you've been awfully good, but I sure hope you know what you're doing. Here I stand 2 years later, and someday we're voting on my husband being on staff here. It shall be well. I didn't understand it. It's just beginning, to be honest about it, right, Lord Jane? It's just beginning. But all along, God knows what he's doing. And it's so hard to see that when we're the one in the middle of the mess. Let's see here. So she said it is well, or it shall be well. And then notice verse 24 through 26. Then she saddled an ass and said to her servant, drive and go forward. It's kind of like, yeehaw, here we go. And off they go. I can't cry and read at the same time. And this is a small print Bible. Drive and go forward. And then listen to this. Slack not thy riding for me unless I bid thee. You drive this horse till I tell you I'm going to drop off the back. And don't slow down for me unless I tell you to. So she went and came unto the man of God to Mount Carmel. And it came to pass when the man of God saw her afar off that he said to Gehazi his servant, Behold, yonder is the Shunammite. Run now, I pray thee, and meet her, and say unto her, Is it well with thee? Amazing how that phrase keeps coming back up. Is it well with thy husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered, It is well. How could she say that? Other than she trusted God. And when she came to the man of God to the hill, she caught him by the feet. Notice her position. She was on her knees, but she really needed some help. She caught him by the feet, but Gehazi came near to thrust her away, and the man of God said, Let her alone, for her soul is vexed within her, and the Lord hath hid it from me, and hath not told me. She knew she could trust God's man, and when she got there, he didn't know what was going on. Talk about mixed emotions. That would have been a rough one. But she still had faith in the man of God. Then she said, this is where she shows her humanity. Then she said, Did I desire a son of my Lord? In other words, did I ask you to pray for God to give me a baby? I didn't ask for that. You did that. Do not deceive me. Then he said to Gehazi, Gird up thy loins and take thy staff in thine hand and go thy way. If thou meet any man, salute him not. And if any salute thee, answer him not again. And lay my staff upon the face of the child. So I want you to notice, before I get into the actual resurrection part of the story, she first of all, I want you to notice her urgency when she said to the servants, You just drive. Don't stop unless I tell you. Her lack of care for her own comfort, and the fact that, again, she said, It is well. And then when she got there, she knelt at his feet. And this was the point I wanted to make about, I said she was going to show her humanity. There's nothing wrong with being human. That's what we are, and God knows that's what we are. The problem, though, is when we let our humanity stop us from having faith in His sovereignty and His ability. So it all comes down to where faith is no longer faith. Then we've got a problem. If we come to God, the verse said, Help thou mine unbelief. That's how we approach God. God, everywhere in this book you did it. And I believe you did it. I believe you can do it. I don't know how. That's showing our humanity, but still coming to God. I love when Pastor Dean says every time we kneel on our knees to pray on Wednesday night, it's a reminder that we need God, and we believe He can help us. And then I love the part that she didn't leave until she got help from God's man. Let's see, she asked the questions to him, Did I desire a son? And he said, all that good stuff. Verse 30, And the mother of the child said, As the Lord liveth, and as my soul liveth, I will not leave thee. She wasn't going back just because God, bleh. Let me try that again. I sound like you. Bleh. Because Gehazi was going back with the staff. She wasn't leaving without the man of God, not the man of God's servant. So she still let him go do his thing, but she was counting on the man of God. Let's skip down to verse 35. Verse 34. Back up one more. Verse 33. I don't want to miss any of the story. And he went in. So this is now Elisha and she are back at the house where the dead son is. He went in therefore and shut the door upon them twain and prayed unto the Lord. And he went up and lay upon the child and put his mouth upon his mouth and his eyes upon his eyes and his hands upon his hands, which again is a reminder that this child was now grown. He was an adult young man. He was Elisha's size. And the flesh of the child waxed warm. Then he returned and walked in the house to and fro. So he goes up and he lays down on the son, and the son's body begins to warm. And then he gets up and he goes back and he's pacing through the house. Goes back into the house to and fro. And the child, verse 35. Then he returned and walked in the house to and fro and went up and stretched himself upon him. So he goes and does this again. And the child sneezed 7 times. I had 5 this morning before I started. We were joking about we needed a disclaimer. Everybody's heat and air conditioning's been back and forth this week and your sinuses are running. So if everybody's wiping their nose, it's not COVID. It's called furnace-itis today. So the child sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. And he called Gehazi and said, Call this Shunammite. So he called her, and when she was come in unto him, he said, take up thy son. Oh my goodness gracious. And you would think she would do that same dance and a jig that I talked about when the diaper bag was empty. No, it was just the opposite reaction. She went in and fell at his feet. She went back to a position of worship and bowed herself on the ground and took up her son and went out. Oh my goodness, so many lessons we can learn from the Shunammite woman. But if I stay there, we'll never get to the other ones. So, there we go. Next, we're going to go totally opposite to King Asa. How in the world do we get to King Asa? This story has perplexed me for a long time. We're going to be in 2 Chronicles, chapters 14, 15, and 16. And no, I'm not going to read them all, I promise. King Asa is the 5th down the line from King David. That would be great-grandson, right? Grandson, great, and great. Yes, great-great-grandson of King David. Asa is obviously totally different background than our Shunammite lady. Totally different gender than our Shunammite lady. Totally different power level than our Shunammite lady. He's the king. Chapter 14, I'm going to read the first 5 verses there so you kind of get the picture of what was going on. So Abijah slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of David, and Asa, his son, reigned in his stead. In the days the land was quiet, 10 years. Oh, blessed thought. And Asa did that which was good and right in the eyes of the Lord his God. For, this is what he did, he took away the altars of the strange gods and the high places, and brake down the images, and cut down the groves, and commanded Judah to seek the Lord God of their fathers, and to do the law of the commandment. And he took away out of all the cities of Judah the high places and the images, and the kingdom was quiet before him. He depended on God. He removed all the other influences out of Judah. Got rid of the idols, got rid of the groves. You know, they would go to a grove and bow down and worship there instead of going to the temple. He got rid of all that stuff. He wanted Judah to go back to serving God like they were supposed to. That to me sounds like a great way for a king to rule a country. Chapter 15 then. We're going to skip down. In chapter 14, verses, I need to do this. Let's see here. Verses 9 through 15. And there came out against them Zerah the Ethiopian with a host of 1,000,000. That's 1,000,000, right? 1,000 is 3 zeros, and another 1,000 is 3 more zeros, so that's 1 with 6 zeros. That's 1,000,000. Let's see here. With a host of 1,300 chariots. So 1,300,000 chariots. And came to Mareshah. Then Asa went out against him, and they set the battle in array in the valley of Zephathah at Mareshah. This is a real trial to just try to read Bible words in front of people. And Asa cried unto the Lord his God and said, Lord, oh, this is another good illustration of faith. Lord, it is nothing with thee to help, whether with many or with them that have no power. Help us, O Lord our God, for we rest on thee, and in thy name we go against this multitude. O Lord, thou art our God. Let not man prevail against us. So the Lord smote the Ethiopians before Asa and before Judah, and the Ethiopians fled. And Asa and the people that were with him pursued them unto Gerar, and the Ethiopians were overthrown, that they could not recover themselves, for they were destroyed before the Lord and before his host, and they carried away very much spoil. And they smote all the cities round about Gerar, for the fear of the Lord came upon them, and they spoiled all the cities, for there was exceeding much spoil in them. They got lots of goodies after the battles. They smote also the tents of cattle, and carried away the sheep and camels in abundance, and returned to Jerusalem. So Asa prays to the Lord for help when it's time to face 1,000,000 chariots of Ethiopians. We have no idea how many soldiers there actually were. That was just the number of chariots. And he says, God, you can handle this whether there's a bunch of them or a few of them. And we really need you, Lord. Oh my goodness, if we would just learn from that to stay dependent on God. Then chapter 15, verse 2. The Spirit of the Lord came upon Azariah, the son of Oded, and he went out to meet Asa and said unto him, Hear ye me, Asa, and all Judah and Benjamin. The Lord is with you while you be with him. And if ye seek him, he will be found of you. But, sounds just like Deuteronomy, sounds just like Exodus. But if ye forsake him, he will forsake you. He was dependent on God, And then in chapter 15 and farther down, then like verses 12 through 16 and 19, I want to read just a portion of that. Let's see here. Verse 12. And they entered into a covenant to seek the Lord God of their fathers with all their heart and with all their soul, that whosoever would not seek the Lord God of Israel should be put to death. Whoa. If you're not serving the Lord, off with thine head. Can't do that in Baptist churches. Whether small or great, whether man or woman. Not just the deacons. All the way down to the children. And they swear unto the Lord with a loud voice and with shouting and with trumpets and with cornets. This was a big deal. They were making a covenant with God that they were going to seek after him. And then all of a sudden, let's see here. Verse 19 says, and there was no more war until the 35th year of the reign of Asa. Asa was blessed because he stayed close to the Lord and let the Lord fight his battles. And then I'm going to rush through this because I know it's going to take longer because of reading the verses, but I wanted you to hear how God works it, not just what I think about it. Then after verse number 19, when we get into chapter 16, all of a sudden it's like there's been 20 years of silence, 20 years of peace, 20 years of no big deals. And something happened. I don't know what happened. I don't know if Asa got comfortable, if Asa got used to the blessings of God, if Asa forgot how he got the, I don't know what happened. But I do know that in chapter 16, all of a sudden there's distance from God. Because an enemy king rose up against him in verse 1. And in verse 2, he brought silver and gold out of God's house to take to an enemy to ask them to break their alliance with the other enemy that was fighting against them and become his ally. Phew! A triangle of a mess, sounds to me like. And using God's money to do it. So that's what he did. And then in verse 7 through 9, and at that time Hananiah the seer, which is an Old Testament word for the prophet or the preacher, came to Judah, and he said unto him, because thou hast relied on the king of Syria, and not relied on the Lord thy God, therefore is the host of the king of Syria escaped out of thine hand. Asa let there become distance between him and God, and he lost God's blessing. And all of a sudden he's in a war, and instead of counting on God and having deliverance like he had the first time, he's in a battle that he's trying to fight himself using money and enemies to get him on his side. And the preacher comes to him and says, don't you remember what God did with Ethiopia? Don't you remember how you prayed and how God delivered him? And I want you to look at this. Verse number 12. Nope, hang on, back up. Verse number 10. Then Asa was wroth, or very, very angry, with the seer, and put him in the prison house, for he was in a rage with him because of this thing. God's man came to deal with the king and say, wake up, do you realize what you're doing? And he got angry, and he put God's man in prison for telling him the truth. That's the only thing God's man did wrong. And in verse number 12, and Asa in the 39th year of his reign was diseased in his feet. And until his disease was exceeding great. Listen to this. This is so specifically shows the decisions he had made to not call on God. Yet in his disease, he sought not to the Lord, but to the physicians. He wouldn't even pray and ask the Lord to heal his feet. He just kept going to the doctors. And Asa slept with his fathers and died in the 140th year of his reign. For 2 years, he had that disease in his feet, and he would not go to God over it. What in the world happened? I don't know. All I know is I don't want that to happen to me. He's our second illustration, and I promise I'm hurrying. I really do. The third one is Esther. I'm not going to read nearly as much because you know so much about the story of Queen Esther. She starts off as an orphan girl. Her uncle Mordecai is a prisoner of war under Nebuchadnezzar's reign, and he's taking care of her and raising her. The Bible doesn't say if her parents were killed in the war. All it says is she had no mother or father. She's an orphan. But it does say that she was his uncle's daughter, so she was his cousin. So Mordecai's taking care of her. In chapter 1 is the whole, this is probably not a good way to put it, but I put in quotes, Chapter 1 of Esther is the, quote, feast turned burlesque show turned divorce saga. You know, where he wanted his queen to come in and show off her beauty in front of all the drunken guys that he's had there for the feast all this time. And she refused, and she lost her position as queen and as his wife, and she's gone. Chapter 2 then was the search for the new queen. That's when that begins, and that's when we hear about Esther and about Mordecai and what's going on with him. And then enter Ezra. Oh boy, let me try again. Esther enters the beauty contest in chapter 2, and this little orphan girl she wins the beauty contest. And again, when I was younger, I would think that's one chapter. Man, that was fast. It was 6 months of just purifying yourself. Talk about makeup. Talk about expenses. Talk about JCPenney's, that center section of my husband can't walk through because it makes him sneeze from all the smells, all right? That was a long time. But she wins. This little orphan girl who's Jewish is becoming this foreign king wife, the queen, in a heathen land. Once again, I'm reminded God doesn't do things the way we do. He picks the most random, unusual people and circumstances to get his will accomplished. Chapter 3, then Haman, old wicked Haman, enters the scene. And he doesn't like the fact that Mordecai won't bow down to him. Makes him very, very angry. So he comes up with a scheme to get rid of Mordecai and all Mordecai's people. Chapter 4 is the true colors of Mordecai and Esther come out. They find out what's going on, that the king has signed this decree based on the partial, what do they call that, fake news? Partial reporting that Haman did to him. He didn't tell him it was the Jews that he wanted to destroy. He just said, this group of people, that there's so many more of them than there are of us. That's who we need to get rid of. He didn't tell him it was the Jews. So now, Mordecai is a Jew. He's a servant in the king's castle. He hears what's going on. He goes to Esther and says, we got to do something. Esther could have pulled out the queen card. Said, well, let me go talk to my honey and see what I can, get him to do. Their true colors came out, and she said, we're going to fast and pray for several days. And then her famous words, and then I will go into him, and if I perish, I perish. If she died, she was going to die doing right. But she was going to try to take care of the people. Chapter 5 then, Esther has she uses a properly timed feast, and the Lord uses a bad night's sleep for the king to set the stage for deliverance. Because the king can't sleep, and he wakes up in the middle of the night, and then he finds out that Mordecai saved him from two guys that were going to try to kill him, and he realizes nothing's ever been done for Mordecai to honor him. And the very next day, he decides he's going to honor him, and Haman comes to see him first thing in the morning, thinking he's going to, get on the king's good side. And the king says to Haman, so if I wanted to honor somebody, what do you think I ought to do? And Haman's like, oh, dude, this is it. Here's my chance. He goes, I think you ought to put him on one of your own horses, and put one of your own crowns on him, and put one of your own robes on him, and have him go through the city and have somebody cry, this is the man whom the king wants to honor. And the whole time Haman's head's going, zoop. And the king says, good, go do that for Mordecai. And he was like, what? Yes, sir. How could you imagine? Embarrassed? Oh, he was so embarrassed. But he had to, because that's what the king told him to do. That's what happened in chapter 5 and 6. Chapter 7 then is when Esther, they've prayed, they've fasted. It's time to approach the king about what's going on. Chapter 7, she reveals Haman's plot to the king. 2 meals. Fastest way to a man's heart is always through his stomach. Right. She set up a feast one day, and she had him come back and do it again the next day. The best way to break good news to your husband is literally the sandwich method. Give him a good sandwich first. All right, let's see here. So she tells King Ahasuerus is his name, what's going on. And Haman's, he's busted. He's right there. And the king believes his bride. He can see that she's telling the truth. Chapter 8 then, Haman is hanged on the same gallows he was planning on hanging Mordecai on to get rid of him. And Mordecai gets promoted to take Haman's position. And Esther, the little orphan girl, who was raised by her uncle as a prisoner of war, is now the queen with her own house. She gets Haman's house and all of his servants. Talk about a fairy tale. Who is it that wrote all these fairy tales? Yeah, that's probably right. Hans Christian Andersen, I don't know. Grimm's fairy tales. That's who I was trying to think of. Yes. Talk about a fairy tale that they didn't come up with. It's right here in the Word of God. You know, we would say it was ironic. No, it's God's will. King Ahasuerus gives Queen Esther and Mordecai then a carte blanche to defend themselves, because what the king didn't realize when Haman first came to him and said, we need to destroy these people, the king signed a decree saying, yep, they're going to go out on such and such a day, and they're going to go to these cities, and they're going to destroy all these people that we need to get rid of, not really realizing it was the Jews and it was his bride's family. So that's already in law. They wouldn't go back and undo their laws in those days. So instead of undoing the law, he signed a decree saying that all of those Jews could defend themselves when the armies came against them. And that's exactly what they did. In 2 days, all of the enemies that were sent out by the king to destroy the Jews were destroyed. And the king gave them permission to do it. The Jews were not the aggressors, but they were defending themselves. And then chapter 10, I promise we're almost done. In chapter 10, Mordecai was promoted to being second in command. Haman thought he was going to be the big dog. Haman ends up being hanged. His arrogance and his pride got in the way, and God protected his own, as he always does. The Bible said in chapter 10, though, that Mordecai had two principles basically that controlled his life. He was seeking the wealth or the welfare of his people, and he was speaking peace to all his seed. He was trying to do everything he could to help his families, his people, be blessed by God and succeed. All right, next one. We are almost to the end. So every single thing that we've talked about, every illustration, all three of these, has had totally different circumstances, different genders, different everything, different background, everything. But they all demanded responses. Every time something in life changes, it demands a response. And I'm going to tell you the truth. Tomorrow is going to bring another change in my life. And it's going to demand a response. Up until now, we've been church members. If Tony Leonard gets his way and he votes for me tomorrow, which is what he said he was going to do, and my husband gets plenty of votes, then our life will change once again, and we will be on staff here. And it will demand a response. Am I going to give as much here as I gave in our church before? Am I going to go above and beyond? Am I going to do more than I would expect anybody else to do who's helping me? That was one of the things that's always been my goal. I was in charge of the church nursery, Lord have mercy, in Charleston when we were first out of college, and my husband was an assistant. And there were some days we had 30 babies in the nursery under the age of 2. Yeah, go ahead, do that again. Oh. See, do you see the scalp? That's where that happened. But I never would let those ladies work a nursery shift if I wasn't willing. I will not ask somebody to do something that I'm not willing to do. But every situation demands a response. I was reading this morning, and it reminded me that from Eve all the way through, from Adam and Eve all the way through, every character in the Bible has had to face life, and they've had to make some decisions, have a response. I think this is the last one. This is where you get to participate, all right? Every time we're faced with a decision in life, we also have a choice. Now, you got your papers in front of you. You've been making notes on them. Now, I want you to ruin your papers, and I want you to use those papers during this next slide. I'm going to apply some of the things that we saw, some of the characteristics and things that happened in these 3 illustration stories, apply to all of us in one way or another. So without answering any of the things I'm going to say out loud, I don't want you to say a word to me. If you want to snicker, that's fine. I want you to fold your paper as an answer. Okay, for instance, the first one is, in our lesson, we saw someone who's single. We saw someone who's married. Everybody in this room fits into one of those categories, one or the other. So when I say that, you just fold your paper. I don't care if you want to make it into a pirate hat. I don't care if you want to make one of them little fun things that kids do in school, you know, where you go back and forth and unfold, red, 1, 2, 3, and all that. I don't care what you do with it. If you're good at origami, you just have a good time. If you want to just keep crinkling it, I don't care how you fold it, but I want you to fold it with everything I say. There's going to be 15 of them in case anybody's OCD and you have to divide your paper in half and all that good thing. All right? Just in case. All right, so you're going to fall into one category or the other. And every time I mention one, I want you to fold your paper. All right, single or married. You're going to fold. Some of what we saw, somebody had children, and somebody else dreamed of children. And everybody in this room fits into one or the other. Well, I didn't think about that. Maybe you don't have children and you thank the Lord that that's not, you don't have that nightmare. Maybe that's what it is. No, I'm kidding. Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord. I've told my kids that over and over again. With gritted teeth. The Bible says it. It's true. It's got to be true. Let's see. Now, the third one. We saw some prayers that were answered, and we saw some prayers that were not answered. This is so fun watching you, because the OCD people are like staring at their paper. We saw people who were honored, and we saw people who did not get honored. Or they got overlooked, maybe is a better way to put it. We saw a life of great blessing, and we also saw a life of great sorrow. And once again, isn't this life? I mean, everything I've mentioned, just everybody in this room has faced somewhere along the line. We saw people who took a strong stand, and we also saw some that are wishy-washy. We saw some that were facing defeat, and we saw some that tasted a victory. We saw some that would stand for right in front of their family, and we saw some that caved under pressure. I often wonder what the Shunammite woman's husband would have done if he had known her son had died when she first went to the field. We saw people who made wise choices, and we saw some make some unwise choices. We saw people who were very blessed, and we saw people who probably felt like they were cursed, like they just couldn't get anywhere in life. That's probably what little Esther felt like when she was still a young girl. Speaking of Esther, we saw an orphan. Some people are orphans. Some aren't orphans, but they're from very dysfunctional families, and some have a good, solid family. We saw one little girl that was absolutely beautiful and won the beauty contest. And we saw another lady who was called great, but does the same thing about her beauty, so my guess is she was just ordinary. Some are beautiful, some are ordinary. I won't use the word homely. We saw some that were servants. We saw some that were in a place of authority. We saw some that were humble and obedient, and we saw some other ones that were very arrogant. We saw some that were blessed beyond measure, and we saw some other ones that were just fighting to survive. Is it too small? You can't fold any farther? Yes. All right. So now I want you to take your piece of folded paper and I want you to look at it, because your folds basically resemble your life. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear.
Well, good, because mine looks like
Because what I put was your mess, or whatever you want to call it. This represents your life, and I'm just going to read the rest of this the way I worded it, because this is how I want to finish. Your paper represents your life, the good, the bad, and the ugly. How are you going to respond, Shunammite woman? How are you going to respond, Asa? How are you going to respond, Esther? Will it be with an "it shall be well" or an "it is well"? Will it be with "that man of God better not tell me not to do that again"? Or "if I perish, I perish"? In Exodus chapter 4, when God was giving Moses instruction about leading the children of Israel out of Egypt, he said, "What is that in thine hand?" Now look at what's in your hand, which is your mess of a piece of paper. Moses was actually holding a staff in his hand, and God wanted to use that staff and use that man to lead his people out of Egypt. So my question is to you, what's that mess in your hand? And then now what are we going to do with it? let God use it? How are we going to respond? This is how I would like my response to be. That whatever God says. Yay, Jeannie, I saw you folding out. I couldn't cheer for you on purpose. However my life turns out, I want it to turn into something that's useful. And every response we make, it scares the stuffings out of me. Because every response we make determines what comes next. When my husband was an assistant pastor, and he was praying about going to Pennsylvania to pastor. And I was working for a Christian attorney in town, and I had an hour for lunch. So it was November in Indiana. It was cold, but I remember I took a week, and the only time that I had time to myself that I didn't have family members or didn't need to cook a meal for somebody else was my lunch break. So for a week, I fasted my lunch break, and I walked through town, and I prayed and prayed and prayed and said, God, our kids are 8th grade, 6th grade, and 4th grade, and if we move to the town in mistake, our kids will be ruined. They'll never serve you, and I have no idea what will happen down the road. And for a week, I kept praying, God, please tell us if we shouldn't go there. Please, God, tell us if we shouldn't go there. And he never said nothing to me, which meant he wasn't saying no. And we went, and we stayed 18 years. And our children had their first youth pastors there. And they learned to love the Lord there. And they learned what ministry's like there. And they still love us, in spite of what they had to help set up, like your girls this morning. That's what I was thinking about, setting things up. Every decision we make and every reaction we have or response that we have sets us up for the next one. And just my prayer is that every one of them will be something that's useful. Let's pray, and I think we're done. Well, you got goodies to do afterwards. All right. Thank you, Father, for helping us. Thank you for your word. There's times that we just get in a mode and our minds maybe are wandering while we're reading. But I thank you that if we can focus, you can teach us so much, even just by the examples of the people in the Bible. Thank you for your hand here today and for helping us and for everyone participating. I pray that you'll use this lesson, Lord, to remind us how important it is that every decision, every response, every reaction, everything we do in life is going to build to the next one. Help us to be vessels that you can use, Lord, please. In your name I pray. Amen.